Hello and welcome to the Addicts Anonymous podcast. I'm your host, Jamar. Today's episode 127, and we're going to be interviewing Joseph C. How you doing this morning, Joseph?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it. So let's dive in here and get started. Tell me about your childhood and growing up. How was that?
So growing up, I grew up in Waco, Texas. Um, I come pretty much from a broken home. Um, Dad was good, loving parent, but my mother was a person who was living with multiple personalities, DID, borderline personality disorder,
What's DID?
like dissociative identity disorder, like, can like dissociate but still be moving around and doing things.
Gotcha.
Kind of like somebody who's able to have a blackout like right off the rip without drinking any alcohol.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I grew up in Waco, pretty nice town, it's like Central Texas. Um, just I don't know, like, like I played football because that's what you do in Texas when you're a kid. Like, I did Boy Scouts. Like, I was pretty involved with the church. I never really had that belief or that connection, but it was definitely like, somewhere I could go to, like, get the steam off, like, from home.
What do you mean from home?
Just basically, like, growing up, I was physically, sexually, psychologically abused and tortured by my mother. So it
That was
was,
all from your mom.
yeah, 100%. I even, kind of started experimenting with substances very early, like very, very, very young, like, and,
How
um,
old? How old were you when you first started?
well, I started experimenting at like 8, like alcohol, weed. I had an incident when I was 10. That was like my first encounter with surgic acid, LSD.
So you started very, very young. Wow.
Very, very young, very young. And like, or just any way that I could escape. I would escape through reading. I would escape through comic books. I would escape just by being like, outside. So like, escape was very much like a format, like, escape, but also feeling false, because like I would see other families and how they interacted, and would be confused at times, like, what, like if I said that to my mom, I'd be in the hospital, or like really legitimately in the hospital, like not even joking around, like, or I would see loving interactions, and I guess like what I would do is kind of personalize that, like, like, these folks get, love because they're worthy. I don't get love because I am who I am, because I would take on, like, that kind of abuse within the structure, like, I made it my fault.
Yeah, completely understand. So, what was your school life like during all this?
I mean, up and down. I mean, I guess the best way to describe it was like, like in general, is that like my youth, my childhood wasn't really a childhood, because I was really like, at times fighting to survive. There were times where teachers tried to intervene, and they couldn't do anything about it. And, on the outside, like, my mother, in her younger life, was a very, very powerful woman. She worked for Children's Miracle Network. She did campaign trail for the Clintons. She did, a lot of things where, like, the veneer was very, very tip top. But, through the course of it, like, some of the teachers would see, but they couldn't really do anything about it, like, or they would kind of encourage me to talk, but there was no way I was going to. I think at one point it did get really bad, and I said something, and then like I just ended up recanting my statements because it just wasn't worth the consequences that would, fall down on the entire family. So I mean, like, I like to like, draw in school. Like I like to, but really like I would escape. I would escape. I would do fine in school, but I could do fine in school without really making any effort. And I didn't make effort because like I kind of adopted this like attitude of, well, like things are going to be shitty, like, whether I perform or do the best or not, so I might as well just do it what I want.
Yeah, makes sense.
So
So your grades were good, you said?
yeah, well, pretty good for somebody that's not like, applying themselves. I mean, it could have been better, but like I got by. I could get A's and B's, like, but it wasn't my main priority ever. I never, had the understanding that school could be a way out. It was just the next thing that I would arrive to.
Yeah, school can definitely be a way out. If you do good in school, you can find your way into a new life.
And like having that lesson, like, later on when, my little sister started to kind of hit those crucial formative years, I pressed it and pressed it and pressed it and said, this is your ticket. Like, you don't have to go down the path that I did. This isn't even about lecturing. This is about the difference between whether you're going to be the boss or, you know, you're not, like you want to be able to be empowered. And she ended up, because there was stuff that happened, later, but I guess we could get into it a little bit later.
Yeah, we'll get into it. So as you progressed, did you graduate high school?
No, literally, like I got my GED. I went and took the test while I was blowing crack in between tests out in the parking lot. So I would go do a portion of the test, and then I would go and hit crack in the parking lot, and then I would come in and do more of the test, and I did my entire GED that way. I got kicked out of school, like expelled, by the time I was a sophomore. And then when they tried to put me in alternative school, I ended up, getting in trouble to where I was not welcome at any of the alternative schools in the greater Tucson TUSD district.
What did you do?
So the first day of alternative school, like the principal was trying to like yell at me, and I was like, like, you're not my mom or dad, don't yell at me. He was telling me to turn my shirt inside out or something, and I spit on him.
Oh,
'Cause he's just like, he's like, don't raise your voice at me. What are you gonna do? And I'm like, what are you gonna do? Like, let's fight. Huh. And I'm a Gen Xer too, so like, I'm 42, and I come from that era where like we had corporal punishment in the school still, and I was frequently in trouble, but like, the paddle was nothing compared to like what I was used to, so it was like humorous to me. Don't get me wrong, it hurt, but it was still humorous compared to anything I was facing.
what kind of stuff would actually happen in the house?
Um, Inappropriate physical contact and like torture. I don't want to go too like in depth into the nitty gritty, but like, essentially like it would get so bad, like I would fear for my life often.
Must have been a scary feeling.
Absolutely. But it also introduced me to a feeling that like I would later feel toward the end of my addiction. And it's like the combination of like terror and boredom, which is like the worst combination, you know, that I've experienced to this date. You know, later on when I was getting clean, it was like before I was getting clean, it was like I was starting to, you know, get to a bad point where I was experiencing terror and boredom. And it's like this is just it kind of helped like the click on come, if that makes any sense.
So what did you do after you graduated high school? Or I'm sorry, you got your GED.
So basically, you know, this is really, you know, how school went. So like basically in when we were in Waco still, the Branch Davidian thing happened.
Yeah.
And my dad got really angry. He had already been frustrated with his boss and not really liking the situation with his work situation. And then when this thing happened, he was just like, this is disgusting, you know, like these people just killed these people. They could have just pinched the guy when he came into town. This is ridiculous. And we're getting out of here. And so we're moving to Tucson. So we moved to Tucson. I'd done junior high there for like, you know, the last part of junior high. I'd done high school for, you know, ninth grade and then the beginning of 10th grade. In the beginning of 10th grade, I was kind of on a rip, like shoplifting liquor. I got caught, I admitted to it, and they expelled me. And basically, I just started going kind of downtown, just doing more of what I was doing already while I was in junior high school and high school. It just kind of escalated, you know. So I would go get high every day. I would hustle. I would, you know, kind of make little deliveries or do, you know, whatever I could. Um, and really I just started getting into that, like being a street urchin and learning that life. It's kind of crazy because like, you know, you really have just a few options. Like you can either be like, you know, like a hustler, a dealer, a stick up kid, or a sex worker. And so, you know, I really kind of fell into the stick up kid category and hustler category, you know, and so that's what I was doing. I mean, and I really just got the GED a moment when I had about 2 or 3 weeks sober. I'd come out of some program and my dad's like, "Ah, I got this GED test set up for you. So you at least have that." And I'm like, "Sure, I'll go to that." And he's like, you don't look well. And I'm like, "I'll be fine." And then I was like, I was telling you, it was just, you know, kind of smoking crack and taking my GED.
So was that the only drug you were using?
No, so I started really heavily with alcohol. Okay, at 12, alcohol, and then whatever I could, like if somebody came through with something, I would get it. Inhalant sometimes, but more like nitrous, you know, like crackers, things like that. But when I got in trouble, like when I was barely a sophomore in school, my dad, you know, we'd kind of separated from my mom for a while, and he got a guy to look after me. He looked after the kids in the apartment complex. He seemed like a good dude. He'd worked at the local psych facility for years. Like he babysat a lot of the kids. The thing that my dad didn't know was that this man was a compulsive gambler and a crackhead of the highest order. And basically, I come to his house one day. I was just smoking weed at that time and doing liquor, sometimes pills, sometimes whatever. But then we got to talking, and he's like, "Well, you know, that stuff you're doing ain't shit. Why don't you try this?" And then I tried the crack, and I was addicted instantly. And, you know, kind of went from being like an experimenter to being somebody who was like full fledged. Like, this is what I'm doing. By 14, it was IV drug use, methamphetamine, heroin, whatever I could do. Like, you know, I would get MDMA and I would break it down in lemon juice because real MDMA is not water soluble. And then I would shoot lemon juice and mix MDMA into my vein in order to get the rush. Essentially, like the main thing I needed to do is have the rush, because it's kind of like alcoholics describe a sense of ease and comfort when they take a few drinks. I would get the sense of ease and comfort by going way overboard and then getting that rush. And so I would chase it. And it's really like it became like the only thing that mattered.
At a young age to be shooting up stuff.
It's just like it was a different time then too. Like I'm not saying that the kids on the street don't do it now, but I think it's probably a little bit less prevalent than like how it was in the 80s and 90s, because it was like everybody was shooting up, but the consequences were different. So, I mean, like it's like what we're seeing now, the consequences are actually greater, like than when I was doing it, because we have fentanyl in a pill form, and hell, you can just smoke it, lick it, or touch it, and if it's too potent, you'll die. So that's a very different format, but I just gotten around very weird, very dysfunctional people at a young age, but it was safer than some of the places that I had been. Like I'd gone to treatment. There was like pedophiles working at the treatment center. I went to treatment when I was 13, my first treatment center. There was, a couple of grown men carrying on, trying to have a relationship with one of the little 14-year-old girls in there. And I remember, getting out of that program and being like, these guys are lame. This is lame. Like, these guys are talking recovery. They're lames. Because if you're a big grown ass man trying to have a relationship with a 14-year-old, you're lame, like, in my estimation. And I went back to kind of the safety of like the motorcycle club and the street people, some of the other people I was hanging out with. And you'd be surprised, some of the places that were safe, people wouldn't think they were safe. Like, I fell in with some BDSM people who never propositioned me, never got weird. They'd be like, hey kid, you want to, come and watch cartoons, and hey, you might want to slow down on some of that stuff. You need some of this food. And that was just my experience with like that community. Like, I was kind of safe with them. But being transitory, right? In nature, everything changes, and it changes quickly. Things started to like, escalate quite a bit. Even from that, you would already think, oh, it's escalating, but I mean, it escalated because I had to start doing a lot of crime in order to supply my habit and to supply my tolerance for things.
What
And
kind of stuff were you doing?
I mean, God, like protection, robberies, planning the job, dealing, like at one point, like, I was one of the main people like bringing ketamine into the country. I'd even invented a couple methods that nobody had ever used before to, get it in. And then just really anything I could do. Right? Like, like, I mean, my whole attitude was, I'm committing felonies today. Like, and if you're not committing felonies, then we can't hang, because I don't want you to rat on me for all these felonies I'm committing, and I'm not a rat. So I don't have anywhere to go. I have to do my time. And, and really it was just escalation. My brain always worked that way. I remember when Dare came to the school and they were trying to shock us that day, and they had shown kids that had died on nitrous tanks. And I remember saying, let me see that picture. And I'm like, oh, it's the blue tank with the little yellow line and the red line. Those are the medical grade ones. And they're like, huh? And I'm like, nothing. That night I'm cutting a fence, because I knew exactly where some tanks were. I've been looking at them for a long time, but I just didn't want to grab the racing nitrous as opposed to the medical grade nitrous. So Dare actually helped me out there, because that was how my brain just, it was like a clickety clack of like, how can I get high? How can I get there? How can I get there?
So what did you do? So as far as, your life and employment and trying to just be self-sustaining, how is that?
I mean, I worked some restaurant jobs, I did some construction, but then, that all really fell to the wayside. I mean, it's really important for me, to always remember where I came from, because recovery gave me the format to make my living. Recovery gave me, my livelihood. It gave me the ability to, have a relationship, to be able to struggle, because before that I would just fail. I would just nuke everything because my whole lifestyle and my system was transitory. So I worked some jobs here and there. There was one job that was a little different. I worked at like a Funtastics. I don't know if you're familiar with Funtastics, but it's like a place that's got golf carts and stuff, and like, kids rides. And even then, like, and this was like before things got really horrible, but even then things were pretty horrible enough, right? So it was like coming in there hungover or, drunk with like a couple rolls of Mentos. And somehow, like, parents would like request me because like their kids liked me at this place. And I'd be like, basically like the Billy Bob Thornton of like Funtastics, it was like quite unmanageable. Um, and since I've gotten clean, I've had like a couple of different like little odd jobs, but the majority of them have been in recovery or psych.
It's good that you're giving back.
I
So,
mean, I mean, if we don't, like, where does that put us? When I forget, like, things get kind of rough. And I want to grow in effectiveness and understanding, right? Like, like all of this stuff about like, the needle or things that I did, or, you know, I don't want to go back to that lifestyle, nor do I want to be in that mentality. Because you can be in that mentality and not be getting high at all.
so let's talk about recovery a little bit. When did you first say to yourself, I have a problem, I need to address this problem?
Well, I said that to myself about 5 or 6 years before I got clean, right? But then, like, there was a certain point where I just leaned into it, like, okay, like I'm gonna die. And then, essentially, like my hustle had become shopping cart, dumpster dive, rob drug dealers, rob people that just because like I wanted to kind of do my felony like right on site. You know what I mean? Like get high right on site after my felony. Like, like if we're doing this and we're just gonna rip him up and then we're gonna get high on site. And they're like, dude, isn't that a little like reckless? And I'm like, he's zip tied in a chair. What's he gonna do? Like, we got the room. And because I was just really at that point, and I was planning one of those. I was at a hippie house, and they kind of kept me around like a pit bull because I would scare the lesser tweakers off, and they got along with me. And so I was at this place, and I remember my friend Melissa. She was snorting rails of K off a plate, and she's like, if you keep going the way you're going, Joe, you're gonna die. And then I got like really mad. I'm like, dude, the nerve of her. And like everybody was sleeping. I was planning this run up, and that's exactly what it is. Like, I just run up into the door, like, I hit them with something, I take their stuff, and sometimes I zip tie them or duct tape them up. And I'm planning this run up. However, my feet are really blistered from like walking around, being in them time, like, wandering, like tweaking, that kind of thing. So I had like a pretty gnarly case of the crack foot, and I'm just trying to get all the blisters down. I got my feet in Epsom salt. And I I want to get geared up, right? So I decided to put in some Tupac because I'm just gonna play hit him up. Then I'm gonna go in this dude's house. Like He was, and also I like to rob like really scummy people because that was how I justified it or rationalized it in my mind. Because
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that dude's a straight up borderline chomo. Like, if anything, I'm doing a community service and keeping the community happy often is how when I rob him. And so I'm getting ready and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna place him, hit him up, and then I'm gonna do it. These blisters are almost broke. And I hear her crying. Now I'm like looking for the CD, right? Because I want to drown her crying out, but I hear her crying and she's crying about me. And usually people would do that and I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything in here, but I started feeling it. And then, like, we've all had that day where we're having a perfectly good day. Maybe we're watching some TV. Sarah McLachlan comes on with the fucking puppy commercial and it's like, it's a puppy with its eye out. And you're like, dude, that just ruined my day.
Yeah.
I pop a CD in and it's Sarah McLachlan. And she's like, I'm like, this isn't Hit 'em Up. The lyrics to the song were, do we burn in heaven like we burn down here? I had a vision of my death. I had a vision of my father's death as a result of my death. And instead of looking at the bottom in that moment, I just looked up. It wasn't about a bottom. You couldn't threaten me with consequences, like, because I'd lived on the bottom since I was a small child. Like, I just looked up and I realized people were like living like way better lives and existences than I was. And I was like, well, maybe that could be me. So I went to the detox that I had been to for the 86th time. You see, detox used to be a place where I would wake up after an overdose or be a place to, get a meal or a shower real quick and then leave. I woke up there many times completely disoriented because like TPD would have to revive me. And so now I went and I'm like, I need help. And they're like, yeah, right. And I'm like, dude, I'll go to the meeting. And they're like, what? Yeah, I'll go to the meeting and I'll make my bed. And they're like, you never said that before. You get in here. And then I ended up in a 3-quarter house that was for chronic relapsers. The requirement was to get a sponsor and to work the steps. I started doing this, it's like 90 and 90. I did about 290, 390. I started actively working steps. I started getting involved in just doing service work. And that's how people started to kind of know me in the recovery community. And then it's kind of how I started my whole wild ride with working in treatment, working in the recovery rooms, doing different things, and that was that day that I went to detox. That was March 6th, 2005. I'm 17 years sober. AA and, other 12-step folks, from different fellowships, they raised me. People from NA, people from Dharma, people from churches, what started to happen is when I stood up for myself, people started to stand with me. My life started to change radically.
It's a great way of putting that. So what are you doing nowadays with your life?
I work for a program called 7 Arrows. We're a primary substance use disorder. What we do best is treat substance use disorder. And what we do is we use Native American philosophy. We use equine assisted learning. We use the traditional evidence-based practices because addiction takes you off your center. And so we utilize these things to center people. Okay, it's a cool place. It sits on 160 acres. It's only a 16-bed facility and there's 30 horses there for the clients. And it's a truly remarkable place. And I kind of lucked out, being able to work there. I was doing first responder psych before that, which is kind of wild. You're having to fight a lot, thank God for Brazilian jiu-jitsu and things like that. which is something that I also do. Like, my professor, he's actually, in recovery, has been with me like through the gate. Essentially, there's a group of us that kind of formed, and we've all been in each other's life for like, many years. And so we have a village. Now, all of us have families and different projects and stuff like that. Um, However, we do keep in touch with each other, you know. So essentially I reach out to people, I help people get into treatment, whether they're gonna come to my facility or not. Um, I'm just like pretty much like a resource person.
That's great because people need the resources. That's what I try to do with Addicts Anonymous is just make it, place for resources to help. And this is part of it.
How long have you been doing this podcast?
Not long. We started sometime around December.
Awesome.
Yeah, but we've gotten a couple thousand, a little more than a few thousand downloads and listens and watches. So we're slowly growing, but it's a process. I'm looking at like a 5-year plan for the group.
Right. I totally get that. I totally understand.
Yeah, I know I can do it or we can do it, but it's going to take time.
Absolutely.
So another question for you, it's usually my last question is, do you have any advice for people watching and listening?
Yeah, like, the biggest thing I can say is that anything that you put before your recovery, you will lose. Like if you put your recovery first, you're going to be in a better spot. But if you're an addict or an alcoholic like me, it's not just about substances. Like substances are a symptom. Like, what we really have is a way of thinking, right? And if you kind of couple that with trauma, which most people like I've said this and I'm emphatic about this, I think trauma is the gateway drug. I don't think it's cigarettes, I don't think it's alcohol, I don't think it's weed. I think trauma is the gateway drug that kind of leads to all things that might be poison. And so it's like you have a responsibility, to maintain that recovery and put that recovery first. However, if you do that, all of the areas and things in your life will be good as a byproduct. And I've tried to steer away from that philosophy, or, well, let's just see how this works. And nope, it's fundamental. It's fundamental for a clean and sober person. The other thing I would say is like, dude, like I had this crazy drug story, right? And I don't even like to get too deep into it. There was like, there's people that I work for that have been on like National Geographic, locked up abroad and stuff, and like, like just like seriously scary people. It doesn't do good for a dinner, conversation when you're meeting parents and maybe you want to marry their daughter and those parents aren't in some type of program, right? Like if we talk about our thoughts and our feelings more and kind of just use like the story as like, a platform or a device to talk about our thoughts and feelings, I feel like more people will be reached, especially if we are doing those things like putting our recovery first and maintaining because I feel like everybody comes into, recovery for broken heart. And so it's like, what are you going to do to build that back up? And a lot of times no one can build it back up for you. You got to be like the sole person like doing the work. There will be help along the way, of course, but we're responsible for repairing our broken hearts.
It's good advice. So do you have anything else that you want to throw in there?
I just want to say that Arizona's beautiful. Seven Arrows where I'm at, is beautiful. You know, like we're more kind of like spiritual. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the program of AA for saving my life. I'm grateful for people who worked in recovery that have nothing to do with the 12-step fellowship that kind of helped me along the way and started standing with me when I stood up for myself. I'm grateful for you, Jim, for having me, and I'm grateful for everybody that might be having a really, really, really fucking hard time because they're starting their recovery today. And you know, it's just keep coming, keep reaching out, um, keep talking to the people that, like, you know, have a light in your eyes, and that light will soon be yours.
It's very nice. It's a great way to put it. So I appreciate you coming on the podcast today. How do you feel?
I feel great.
It's great. Yeah, I love doing this. So for everybody watching and listening, like what you heard and saw, go below, give us a like. Also click subscribe. You'll be able to see when we upload new videos. You can check us out on Twitter, Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We also have our website that is addicts-anonymous.com. There you'll find a bunch of resources as well as a bunch of our literature. So you can type on, or I'm sorry, click on the approved literature tab and you'll see all the stuff we have available for free. So that's all I have for today. And until next time.